Hey, viewers and viewers, my name is General Red Strategist, and welcome back to Say Being Hunted, episode 515. It's another podcast-style episode today. I was originally thinking about doing a challenge, but I decided I just wanted to do a quick podcast episode, just because I was, well, I'll explain, basically. So, you can probably already tell from my tone of voice that I have something that's kind of serious on the mind here, and I just kind of want to blow some steam off because basically I encountered something earlier this morning which has really just kind of got my blood boiling a bit, and not in a good way, in a sort of bad, I cannot believe that we're actually having to discuss this in 2022 kind of way. And like I said, I need to talk about it. I need to vent, basically, and usually So You're Being Hunted podcast style episodes are a good way of actually venting. But I'll give you a bit of an overview. So, I'm going to strip away the sort of general red persona for a little bit in this episode. And, what you're hearing is the actual me in this part, my own actual personal views. So, yes, ladies and gentlemen, disclaimer at the start, what you're about to hear, this is genuinely how I feel and what I think. So, for anyone who doesn't know, here in the UK, there's a radio station called LBC. And LBC runs a lot of programs like phone-in shows, things like that, and it deals with political issues. So yes, we're about to get political in this episode. But I ask that you just bear with me and listen to what I'm going to say. Now, one of the presenters on LBC, a woman called Sangeeta, who is British Indian by way of heritage, she I was watching a video, and I can't remember if this was from recently, or if this was actually from a while ago. But it might have been a while ago, but I think the issue that was raised in that video is still as relevant as ever. And on one of her shows, there's a clip of it you can find on YouTube. I can't remember kind of what topic the show started out on, but she had a caller who came in. And this caller basically came out with what is actually quite a prejudiced and xenophobic attitude towards people who are not white British. And essentially the logic that this caller had was that because you're not white British, you therefore cannot be British at all. And there was then a follow-up show that this presenter gave, in which basically it was pretty clear she was getting a bit emotional, this presenter, because it was pretty clear those words had actually affected her somewhat. And it got me sort of really thinking, because, trust me, that when you look through the comments left on some of those videos from LBC on YouTube, especially those two, it is really heartwarming when you see the sheer number of comments that have been left in support of that presenter, to say, please do not let that person's words get you down. You are as British as, the next person. But right throughout that bloody comment section, as you can imagine, all the bloody neo-fascists are all out as well, in force. Basically saying, oh no, she can't be British. She doesn't belong here. Things like this. And it's sickening to me. Because this is a woman, this presenter, this is a woman who, as far as I think it was mentioned that she's basically, she was basically born here in the UK, has spent her entire life here, and although she's of, I think it's Indian heritage, she herself has only sort of indirect connections to her heritage, because obviously, like I say, she was born here, she grew up here, her home is the UK and all that. And it just got me sort of... it got my blood boiling, essentially. Because, I'm going to nail my colours to the mast a second here, but I am very much of the opinion that there is a certain quarter, a certain element of the British population. I'll say this, I don't think it's unique to Britain. You will probably find this in every country in the world. I mean, I certainly know, for example, you'll find this You'll find elements like this in the US population. You'll find elements like this in the Japanese population, in European countries. You'll find it everywhere. But a certain section of the population that has this really strict attitude towards who, in their eyes, is of a certain nationality, who qualifies to be of a certain nationality and who doesn't. And quite often, their criteria always feels quite artificial. It comes down to skin colour, it comes down to your race, quote unquote. And the way they measure race is by asking about your ancestry. And some of the comments left by some of these really quite prejudiced, these people who hold really quite prejudiced views, are just so ignorant. And I just think to myself, why does it matter? Why does it matter what colour a person's skin is? Why does it matter if this person, technically, their ancestry, their heritage wasn't English or whatever? Why does that matter? At the end of the day, they were born here, they grew up here, this is their home, they have a British passport, they've worked here in Britain all their life, they've paid taxes to the British government, they've made their contribution to British society, so why are we seriously getting our knickers in a twist over such criteria which, to be honest, are meaningless? Are just pointless, rather, I should say. That's a better word. And, I don't get me wrong, I'm not naive. I know. I've always been aware of this issue. And I know that there are lots of people in Britain who seem to hold this quite out of date, out of touch, really quite prejudiced attitude. And it's prejudiced because, essentially, in sort of very strictly defining what British nationality is, you're excluding a whole swathe of people who live in the country on very spurious reasons. And I think you have to sometimes ask yourself, why? Why do you feel the need to kind of gatekeep British nationality, to put it that way? What's that about? And of course, it gets my blood boiling, because quite often I find that people who come out with these views, they have these very generalising arguments that they put forward. It's always like, tell all this to, Asian grooming gangs in Rochdale and places like that. And the thing is, nobody's denying that what happened, if you're outside the UK and you don't know what that was, basically there was a controversy several years ago when it was found that a gang of men in Rochdale were basically sexually grooming and abusing, basically they were sexually grooming and abusing white girls, and the perpetrators were basically from a certain ethnic background. But I see examples like that always being used by kind of people of, how should I say, more prejudiced persuasions as a way of sort of basically trying to kind of justify their own views. And it's like, nobody denies that what happened to people in examples like that was horrific, and nobody denies that the perpetrators of it should be held to justice. They should. And if the conversation around what those perpetrators did reveals that there are problems in certain communities that need to be addressed, then good, we can address them. But the answer to that is never to say, just make a massive generalisation about an entire ethnic or cultural group of people and then say, they're not British, they shouldn't be allowed, or anything. Because for every person who does terrible acts, you'll find about 10 other people from that same background, that same community, who are probably actually hella nice and haven't done anything wrong. I'm telling you that now. I'm confidently saying that because I feel like it's a pretty safe assertion, And so, like I said, that video from LBC, just the comments that certain people were leaving on those videos, just the clear way in which that caller's words had affected the presenter, it honestly made me feel kind of pissed off. It really did. And like I say, I'm not naive. I know people have been having this conversation for years. Lord, I've had this conversation before. But it just never fails to make me angry every time. Because here's the thing, right? I work in a sector where I meet so many people. I'm so lucky to have the job, the career that I do in academia, because I get to meet so many interesting people, not just academics, but students as well. And these students and academics who I work with, they come from all over the world, and I get to meet people of all kinds of nationalities, all kinds of ethnic backgrounds, all kinds of cultural backgrounds, social backgrounds, and they have great, fascinating stories to tell. And they're all amazing people who've done great things, who have amazing life experiences. And as you can imagine, it never sits well with me when people come out with this idea that, oh, just because you're of a certain heritage, that means you're not British, you're not English, and you never can be. And to me, that's just like closing the door completely. And it infuriates me, because of course in, a lot of, I will be honest, a lot of tabloid media in the UK, you always see editors and people going on about how, oh, immigrants should integrate with the local, with the native population, things like this. And I don't know if I've said it before on So You're Being Hunted, but to that I always say, integration of immigrants is a two-way street, right? Not only must the immigrant make an effort to integrate, but this also depends on the native population, the host population, being open as well to the idea that that person will one day be one of them. And if you don't have that openness, that willingness on the part of a native population, then that immigrant will never integrate. They'll eventually reach a point where they realise that no matter what they do, there's a section of that population that will just never accept them. Like, seriously, I feel like for some people on that sort of side of the spectrum who see immigrants and immigration in that way, I feel like an immigrant could join the they could join the armed forces, they could fight for the country, they could die for the country, but for those prejudiced people, it won't be enough, because they don't give a shit. They just don't want them to be part of the population, period. And it infuriates me, because I don't see the fucking point of it at all. It's pointless, it's stupid, right? It's stupid because when we talk about factors like heritage, your ethnic background, your ancestry, these factors, I would say, are not as significant as we sometimes make them out to be. And the thing is, why, what purpose does it serve to constantly be highlighting those differences in an effort to basically define and gatekeep who is British and who isn't? What purpose does that serve other than to basically erect very artificial boundaries between people of different backgrounds and cultures and groups? What purpose does that serve? It just creates those boundaries, and it just creates discomfort. It just creates tension. Like, what is the fucking point? Do you see where I'm coming from? I'm not saying that, highlighting differences is entirely useless. Like, sometimes, in politics, there might be certain issues that affect certain groups, in which case, knowing what those groups are can be helpful. But in this context of highlighting those differences for the purposes of trying to gatekeep nationality, I don't see what the benefit of that is, other than just to divide people and pit them against one another, to create this very us versus them mentality, where everything suddenly becomes a zero-sum game and people feel like they're pitted against one another, even though they're not. I'm sorry, this was a serious episode, but like I say, I have to let off some steam, because it always pisses me off. Because like I say, I've met so many people from so many amazing backgrounds, from so many amazing countries in my work and all that, and it just infuriates me, the idea that someone who I've known, who might have lived here in the UK for all their life, they were born here, that just because they don't technically have English ancestry or whatever, that somehow excludes them. You know, they could have been paying taxes, making a real contribution to society, but that for a certain section, and admittedly it's, you know, probably a minority, but it's still a very vocal minority, but for that minority, it doesn't matter what they do. They will never be, in their eyes, accepted into the wider population. Which is why I think that with concepts of nationality, you can't put much stock in them. Because from a legal perspective, sure, it's useful, you know, for passports and things like that, but the reality is that you've got to be careful, because there are people out there who use that concept of nationality as a kind of stick to try and divide people, a wedge to sort of pull people apart for their own ends, for their own purposes. And it winds me up. Yes, sorry. Like I say, just had to let that out, because sometimes, you know, I encounter topics which just get me so wound up and infuriated, and I just think, what is the fucking point? I mean, like, who are these people who come out with these views? What's wrong? Why do you feel that way? Why do you think that some of these factors are as significant as they are when actually they're probably not? And at the end of the day, if someone, like I say, has lived in the country all their life, they were born here, then what does it matter if their parents were born somewhere else? If they've lived here, been born here, have contributed, if they've paid taxes, they've engaged with their local communities, if they've done all that, then what else do you want from them? Well, I'll tell you what people from those sort of prejudiced mindsets want. They just want them to leave, clearly. And it just sickens me. It really does. It pisses me off to no end. Oh, God. Oh, Lordy Lou, sorry. Yeah, getting serious. You're getting a real glimpse behind the General Red mask here, for once. I mean, I say for once, it's not like I haven't sort of spoken honestly before about political issues and things like that here in the So You're Being Hunted series. I mean, just watch some of my Q&As, for instance, and you'll get a glimpse behind the mask quite often. And you know what? If all of this makes me a bleeding heart liberal, then you know what? I'm absolutely happy with that. I'm a bleeding heart liberal, and you know what? I'm not ashamed of that. Because why the hell should I be, right? Liberalism, I would argue, is probably one of the greatest political philosophies that has emerged in the last few centuries of human history. And I think that for all its flaws, a liberal way of doing things is generally a good way of doing things. So sorry, yes. Sorry, I think I'll just probably end it there before I start ranting and raving about other stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I'd say I hope you enjoyed that episode. Well, I don't know if you so much enjoyed it, as you probably found it thought-provoking, maybe, I don't know. But like I say, I needed to blow off some steam, because, just the way that clearly that LBC presenter was affected by that really quite prejudiced view, and just looking at some of the kind of the dichotomy between the majority of comments on those videos, which were very supportive of the presenter, but still that minority of comments from very closed-minded individuals. I just looked at it and I thought to myself, it got me wound up. I think to myself, you know, what I need to remember here is that the majority of those comments were supportive of the presenter, which does mean that there is reason to be faithful in humanity, that for all our problems we can overcome some of the, how should I say, some of the worse elements of our nature. So yeah, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry if this was a bit of a downer, but I had to say it. And you know what? If people come along, if I end up with, you know, some of these friggin', how should I call them, closed-minded individuals on my channel, sort of saying, oh, what a load of shit and all that, you know what, fine, it's your freaking right to say it, We live in a free speech society after all. But I'm free to disagree with you, and I'm free to push back on that, and I'm free to challenge you and say, no, that's wrong. Okay, but yes, Facebook and Twitter links down below, along with the link to my propagandist channel for anyone interested, and if you enjoyed, a like is of course always appreciated and all that. But other than that, I'm going to sign off now. For the next episode, I think I will probably try going back to doing a challenge, because I really need to get to one. Goodbye, everybody! Gimme. Give me all the fun stuff. Chomp. Do that. Give me these two as well. There we go. You know, it's not good to just sort of leave your rubbish coming out on the Fuck me, it was just a cat. Who'd have thought, eh? Who'd have thought that a friggin' cat could be that scary? You got me good there, game. You didn't even need to do anything overly spooky. You just needed to do that. That was it. GG. Fucking well done. I'm sure there's worse stuff knocking around here. Note. Just to look at. Alright, let me out. Let me out, please. What's this one? You were good at this. Well, thank you very much. I pride myself on my public sanitation work. I take great pride in it.